Now that we have our player taking damage from the lava, let's make it a little bit more interesting. Let's make it so that our player bounces off or gets knocked off of the lava, or anything that they hit that causes them to take damage, and then knock them back, and then maybe even add in a sound effect. To do that, we're going to open up our player script again, and we'll take a look at the part where we take damage. When we take damage, what I want to do is have our player kind of fly back the opposite direction if they hit something. So if they hit something straight up and down, they kind of go up. So if they land on something, they go up. If they hit something at an angle, they kind of go up and at some sort of an angle, kind of off the way that they should bounce back. So to do that, we're going to need to know the angle of the collision that our player came in at, and then tell them to bounce in the opposite direction of that angle. So what we're going to do is take a parameter in our take damage method. Right now it takes no parameters, so that's why the parentheses is open, but we're going to make it something like the bind method, where it will actually take in a parameter that's a vector2. So put vector2. And what we want here is the hit normal, or the kind of collision normal, which is the angle that we've come in and collided at. So this is going to be a vector2 representing the angle that we collided at. And I'm going to call this hit normal. And then down here on line 159, we're going to tell our rigid body to add some force in the opposite direction of our impact, so that we bounce back the opposite way that we hit. To do that, we'll call underscore RB dot add force, and we'll give it our hit normal. And we want to multiply it by some velocity amount, some knockback velocity. But we want it to be the negative value of that knockback velocity, because we want the opposite of our hit normal. So we can do a negative hit normal here, or star equals negative underscore, let's call this knockback velocity. In fact, I'm going to move the negative over to hit normal just so that it's a little bit more obvious. So we've got our knockback velocity now. It doesn't exist. We're going to generate a field for it, and that'll be a serialized field. So I'll hit F12 to go up to it, replace private with serialized field. And we want to replace this vector2 as well. By default, it just assumed that I want a vector2, and that's because we were multiplying a vector2 times that number. So it just says, hey, you probably want another vector2. But we really want a static or a floating point variable, not a static, but a single variable or value that we can multiply our hit normal by, so we can have some sort of a magnitude or intensity for that velocity. So we're going to replace vector2 with float. And then we'll give it a default value of, I'm going to go with 200. I'm going to move this up by my other serialized fields. So I'll cut it and then paste it right up here by my coin sound effects, and then we'll save. Now I should be able to go back into Unity and see my value right here of 200 right below my coin sound effects. I have an error though, so I'm not going to see that. Let's take a look at this error here. It says that spikes.cs has an error saying there's no argument given that corresponds to the required formal parameter hit normal of player.takedamage vector2. And here it says this is on line 15 at column 24. The line number is always good. The column number usually okay, but not always 100% accurate. Line 15 though. So let's double click on it. And here you can see that we're calling line take damage, and it looks like column is correct too. But we're calling the take damage method, and it now has an error because we didn't pass in that parameter that it wants, the hit normal. I hit F12 to go to this. Let's go back and just pass that in. To get the hit normal, we actually can grab it from our collision data. We'll pass in collision dot contacts, and the contacts are all of the different points that our collision hit. So most of the time our contacts is going to be an array with one entry, and it'll be like, hey, right here at this specific point on my finger is where the contact is. It'll tell me the exact point and that normal. If I hit in two spots in the exact same frame though, I might have contacts like this where I've got, or technically if it was, yeah, you could end up with two contacts, or maybe they're like this and they're like side by side, and I'm touching at two spots on my hand with this other hand object. I could have two in there, but by default, we're always going to have at least one, so we can access it by index 0 and then get the normal. So we're going to pass in the normal of the first contact. If they have multiple contacts, we're just going to ignore it and assume that the first one is the correct one. Most of the time, we're only going to have one though. So let's save. At least most of the time with our normal character on a normal surface, we're going to have one contact. So here we'll save, and now we should no longer have that error. If I hit Control-Shift-B, I should get a build succeeded in the bottom left, and I should be able to go back over to Unity. See my knockback velocity, press play, and now run over to this lava and start bouncing off the top of it. Let's see if that's the case. So I run over here, jump, and bounce, bounce, bounce. You can see I'm getting knocked up. Let's change this to a 300, and let's give myself some more health. I'm going to go select the player input manager and game manager, grab my health, and crank it way up like that. I got 405 health. Now I bounce, and that feels like a more reasonable amount. Thinking 300. Let's go with a 400 and see what that looks like. Yeah, I think I might even be good with a 400. So I'm going to stop playing, put in a value of 400 here for my player, save, or go to overrides and apply all, and then I'll even go into the code and just change that default. That's one of the things that I like to do a lot. If I come up with a new default value that I think I'm going to use, I'll just go into the code and change it right away. So that way I don't have these overrides in two different values and have to try to remember which one did I actually want to use. Now I've got my knockback velocity in there. We'll go in, save our scene one more time, go to plastic SCM so that we've added a knockback to taking damage. And you're going to notice that this happens when we hit the springs as well. Anything that causes damage is now going to knock us back.